Welcome to the webinar about how to replicate data between multiple Microsoft Dynamics ERP instances. My name is Henning Lund, and with me I have Thomas Boring, and we will take you through the different topics of today. We have made a small agenda for you. The first part of this webinar will be about the RapidiReplicator overview, where we will go through some of the business scenarios. And after that, we will have a deep dive demo into the RapidiReplicator, where you can get more insight of how the technical aspects of the solution works. Data replication is about synchronizing data between different databases. The RapidiReplicator supports all the different Microsoft Dynamics solutions, both the new ones within the Microsoft Dynamics 365 product suite and the older versions from originally Navision and Accepta. The integration can, of course, be used just to integrate data between two different databases, but there are a lot of other scenarios. For instance, you can use the data replication for consolidation, where you pull data from local Microsoft Dynamics databases into a central Microsoft Dynamics instance, from where you can do your reporting. Another scenario is when you have master data management, where you either pull local master data into a central service and distribute it to the local instances, or you can add additional master data in the central system and distribute this locally, just as you can see on the screen here. Both scenarios are, of course, possible. In reality, you can set up the replication between all the different systems that you have. You can make the integration in any direction, and you can have a simple setup, or you can make it very complex depending on what your business requirements are. You do also have the possibility to integrate to other databases. Then we call the system Rapidi Online, but in reality, the technology behind this is exactly the same. So how do we do this? Well, the RapidiReplicator is a no programming solution. It means that you don't have to do any programming in order to set up the integration. You don't have to do any programming in your Microsoft Dynamics systems either, which means that it's pure configuration. It eases the implementation, and it makes sure that we don't jeopardize your upgrade path on your Microsoft Dynamics product suite. It also gives you the possibility actually to integrate either in the cloud or as a hybrid solution. It means that if you don't want data to leave your network, you can install the Rapidi engine locally on one of your servers, and then the integration or the replication between your different systems will happen entirely inside of your own network, so no data would leave the system. We can integrate any data and between any legal entities, so you are free to share data within your environment, and we can also integrate on any platform and between any platforms, whether they are in the cloud, if they're hosted on-premise, or even laptops or tablets. And with the RapidiReplicator, you have one platform that will suit all the different requirements. Some of the typical scenarios that we see is, for instance, the master data management, where you synchronize item prices, customers and contacts, etc. You can also use RapidiReplicator to transport your intercompany transactions. A very common scenario is to create a purchase order from a sales order in another legal entity or in another database. The RapidiReplicator can also be used for high availability solutions, such as within retail, where you want to make sure that a local store can continue to carry out the business if the internet is down, and then the RapidiReplicator will make sure that we pick up on the synchronization as soon as the connection is back. The most common scenario is actually the consolidation scenario, where you consolidate data from multiple data sources for improved reporting, and you can do this without the traditional hassles of doing export and imports. And it also secures you that the data you have are data that you can trust. And all of this, as I mentioned before, can be done between legal entities, between different applications or even versions, and between the different platforms that you are working on. From a practical perspective, it also means that if you have an environment where you have different Microsoft Dynamics versions in different countries, for instance, that's not a problem. It's not always that you upgrade all your instances exactly at the same time. And with the RapidiReplicator, you can actually follow an upgrade path exactly as you want, because we can synchronize data between any of the versions. The RapidiReplicator has been on the market since the late 80s. It can be used for very simple integrations just between two instances, but it can also be used for large-scale operations like the Rema 1000. It's a retail chain where they have actually now more than 200 Nav instances where they replicate data between the different systems. So whether it's simple or it's complex, the RapidiReplicator is still one solution for you. The RapidiReplicator platform consists of several components. Everything is of the configuration happens on the cloud platform. This is where you have your account, and this is where you have all the tools to maintain your configuration and where you can maintain your access. We have tools for data mapping, so you can decide exactly which data you want to synchronize between the different systems. We have a scheduler where you can define how frequent and in which order you want to transfer data. We have a component called the RapidiConnector. It's a small Windows service that is used to connect on-premise systems to the cloud and through the firewalls in a very secure way. One of the most appreciated features is our log with notifications, where we keep information about the transfers that you send forth and back. We don't store any of your data, so from a GDPR perspective, you're on the safe side here. But you have a direct access if you need to investigate if, for instance, you have keyed in the wrong data in a field and you need to change that. We have a data toolbox that can be used to convert data. It can also do a lot more. Thomas will get back on that. We have an API front end where you can develop basically your own front end tool. And we have support for many different endpoints besides the Microsoft Dynamics product suite. So in case you sometimes in the future want to open up for integrations with other systems, then the Rapidi online platform is also suitable for doing that. We have spent more than 80,000 hours making data replication simple, and we have a lot of different technology that is used in order to do that. We have a timestamp technology that is used in combination with AX and Dynamics 365 for finance and operations in order to make sure that we only synchronize new and modified data. I will not go through all of these different components. Instead, I think we should go in and have a deep dive look at what the replicator can do during the demo. So Thomas, may I hand over to you?
Yes, you may. Okay, so what you see here is a service dashboard. Each replicator service will have its unique own dashboard tied to a unique isolated configuration database where all the setup that you do is stored. The dashboard is made to give you a quick overview over the situation of your service, and being cloud-based, it is accessible from anywhere. With a browser, and all the setup and configuration of your data transfers will also take place in a browser. So this makes it very flexible to both maintain and work with, since you can access it from anywhere. To get a quick overview, you can click the service status. You will have some central processes, which are the cloud-based ones that are running here. And then you can see from the outside. So whenever you need to connect a database or legal instance to the integration platform, you install what we call a RapidiConnector, which is a small Windows service set up and forget. So you set it up with a few parameters, start it up, and that will then facilitate the connection between the network and the cloud integration engine with an outbound connection that is encrypted, ensuring the tunnel so you can move data between networks. So as you see here, you can see the different types. Normally, when you have a replicator service, it would be either NAV, either GP, or either AX. It's not common to mix them up, but this is a demo service, so there are some different types. But if we take the NAV ones here, we have some NAV connectors here. You can then see where they are connected from, where the external IP. You can see the server name. So you have a clear identification where those are running. There then are also some monitoring summaries here. So there is due to run and overdue schedules. So if you are running in a production environment and some schedules, which I'll get back to, but these are the ones that make sure your data executes when you set them to. If they have not run on time, you would have a quick list here on the dashboard, so you don't have to dive into the configuration to see how everything is. Once you get your service, step one will always be to set up some connections. And there are a lot of different types. So if I just scroll down here, these are the different data connection types that Rapidi is supporting. So if you, for instance, have a replicator solution for Dynamics Nav, you could also, if you had some old system running on an Oracle database, an IBM DB2 or something like that, you could also add that to the integration and pull that data from there or to there. But a connection works quite simple. You have the RapidiConnector set up. You can see here it's connected up. That creates a direct connection from a local network. You then specify the connect parameters. Here it's a SQL, direct SQL access, where Rapidi actually accesses the SQL database as a native SQL client. So you feed it with the server connect parameters, the database name, which Navision company / legal entity you wanted to read write to, and then how to log in. If it should use Windows authentication, which would be the account the local RapidiConnector service is running on, or if you want to use a database login. When that is filled out, you would then read the sign. So we read the metadata of the database. So when we do our mapping and setup of transfers, we would have all the information available about which tables are there, which fields are in the tables, field types, and so on, including any custom fields that you might have. So for easy setup without having to code or remember or type, which will definitely give you errors. If we stick to the nav here first, we have two approaches. One is the SQL, because it performs very well and can read a lot of data in a short period of time. Another approach that we support is the Nav Web Services. This was not the best example though, but if you want to create new data into Nav, we would use the Nav Web Services, making sure all the business logic is triggered and so on, depending on your solutions. For instance, if you had a solution where you have a bunch of sales guys running around with Nav databases on their laptops, they create sales orders and then they replicate into the central, you would normally use the web services to make sure that when you create the sales order in the HQ database, all the business logic around creating sales orders are triggered, so you're sure they are inserted correctly. But there are a bunch of different types here. Also AX, same approach, direct SQL for high performance reading mainly, and some updating also can be done on that connection. And then we have the web service connection when inserting new data to trigger the business logic and have full control in your ERP system. On GP, Great Plains, the same, but instead of web services, we use the GP store procedures to insert new data to trigger the business logic there. So once you have your connection set up, you would have, for instance, if we stick to Nav here, you would have a connection for each of your Nav databases and legal entities. So in this case, I just have two here. if we have a look at them, one is a Kronos legal entity and a AG for Germany, and another one is a test entity. But all the legal entities that you have, you would set up a connector and a configuration page here to uniquely address that specific database and that specific company in that database. So normally when you set up a solution, you would start with two. One that simulates HQ and one that simulates a department or a laptop or whatever solution you have. And then you would start configure your transfers, which is the logical next step. So the replicator works on a table by table basis. But let me just take you through this. You give them each a code that is total optional, depending on your internal lingo and so on. In Nav, for instance, it's quite common to include table IDs, which are used widely across in the Nav environments. But just any terminology that identifies what this transfer does. Then you give it a description where you can give a more thorough description of what this transfer does. You have a status. So if you're in a working phase, you can kind of, if you're more that work on the solution, you can set them to statuses that we're currently implementing this one. This is one we're using to test on. If you set them to ready, kind of means that, okay, this is good to go, thoroughly tested, and you can put this live. And then you can archive transfers that, yeah, you don't no longer need, but you don't want to delete. There is a status more, so whenever they are active on a schedule so that they would be executed automatically, the status would automatically be set to live by the system. Next is groups. So when you have to execute your solution, moving the data around, you don't want to have to define an execution for each of your transfers, which will be a lot in most cases. You want to execute a group of transfers. So you would gather transfers in a group, and then you can schedule the group to run. And when the schedule fires, it'll then execute all transfers within that group one by one. When you set up a transfer, you use source and destination. So source is the direct link to the connection page where you have set up the connection. So this is where it would read from. Destination is then where data goes to. Within Rapidi, there is a tag system. So if you have HQ and you're running master data management, if we say in this case, and you have 10 different departments spread over offices, you can then set up this transfer once and use tags and then reuse the same transfer for all departments. So you don't need 10 customer transfers to push customers out to the departments. You just need one, and then you can run the same transfer targeting all the departments as destination. Next one up is the table. So this is the table it reads from and the table it goes to. So there is a lot of tweaking going on in Rapidi, and you can basically technically transfer from any table to any table. It just needs to make sense, of course, within the data. So if you have the field. So if you, for instance, have some sort of staging table and you want to kick off a stored procedure to process the data, you could run customers to any table and then push the data in there and then do some work on it in the destination system. So yeah, the possibilities are basically endless. But because we read design, you don't have to remember what the tables are called and so on. You can just start typing. So if I start typing cost, I will get a list of all the tables that have that string in the name, and I can then choose the proper one. And I can do the same for the destination. Then I can choose on the right side. And if I skip some fields and something, it's because the engine is designed to also be able to integrate different design systems. So there is some functionality in replicator solutions that are just not relevant, which is why I'll just skip it. But you choose then what to do. So a transfer needs to be enabled to run. You can then run just update or just add, or you can run update add, which is the most common. You can also run delete. There are some special functionality regarding actions, which is a bit more complex, so I won't dive too much into it. You can also move data, which means that you will take a record, for instance, customer 10,000, transfer it to destination, and then it will be deleted in the source after the transfer, which makes sense in some scenarios, but not in standard ones. Then when you use staging tables as such, the delete all is pretty handy. It basically means that you start by wiping out the entire destination table, and then you can move all your transfers or all your data from source to destination without having to use performance on looking up to check if they exist and needs to be updated. It can just run add straight up to boost performance. There is then a little feature called all fields. So if you're transferring between two similar version ERP systems, that being Nav, GP, or AX, the tables are the same, field names are the same. You can just tick all fields, and it'll then transfer all fields in the table. But you can also define a dedicated mapping field list of the exact fields you want to map, but I'll get to that in just a second.
Thomas, I have a question from the audience. They ask, what if you have some fields that are not the same? Can you then still click all fields and just get the fields that are common, or do you need to do it in a different way?
If you click all fields, it'll match up automatically on execution the fields that have the exact same names. Anything that does not have the same names are going to be ignored. So if you have a custom field or two in the source that are not in the destination, those fields will simply be ignored if you take all fields. I hope that answers the question. Okay, next section here is source control. Henning briefly mentioned it. This is a selection of technologies to make sure you only replicate the data that has changed or been added since the last time. On a system like Dynamics Nav, on all tables by default, there is a timestamp field, which makes it easy because you can just set the timestamp, and it's actually called timestamp. That is the field name on the system. And it's the type timestamp. So we can simply just set that at source control. It will then read the data from source and then store the timestamp, the highest timestamp read. And then next time the transfer runs, it'll automatically from that source to the same destination, which is an important feature. Then it'll automatically set a filter to only read records with a timestamp higher than the last one read. Then there is another called transferred field, which makes handy. If some know the old replicator, there was a flag field functionality, and this kind of simulates it. The transferred field can mark a source record. So if you, for instance, had a field in the customer table called transferred to HQ, from a department, and you then transfer the record, had this field in here. Then when transferred to HQ, the record would then be ticked off in the source. So in the source, you can see which ones have been transferred to HQ and which ones have not. And you would also then use that in combination of it with a filter, so that you can kind of say, okay, I want to send this record, then untick it, and then it'll be sent again and then be ticked. And then whenever you want to transfer it again or update or whatever, you could then untick it. There is a lot of functionality that can be built up around that. Store new ID field is not really that relevant in those solutions here. Commit per is, if you have large tables with many hundreds of thousands of records, timestamp, or perhaps not so large tables, but some database in an area where the infrastructure is not that good and the connection is unstable, then the combination of timestamp and commit per makes it read, like for instance, set it to 1,000, and it will then read 1,000 records, commit the timestamp, continue with the next 1,000. So if the connection breaks down, you don't have to start from scratch. You could then it would then pick up from the last commit. Then the last one here, quite important, is the source mirror. So on GP and AX, you do not have any timestamps in the system at all. So you do not directly on the database have any fields that you can filter on to see what have changed since the last run. Rapidi here developed a mirror technology, and mirror is basically in the same database or in the same server, on the same server. Sorry, you create a database. It could also be in a totally separate server in the same network. You create a Rapidi mirror database. Just create the database and give the Rapidi user full access to it. Then Rapidi will generate compressed mirror tables of the live tables. So when, for instance, transferring customers, it would then go in, compare the live table to the compressed mirror, locally